Just so you know, Chris, Diney and I usually argue in a very friendly way. And first thing she said when she came on tonight was that she was looking forward to arguing with somebody other than me tonight. So you can anticipate. Well, anyway. So thank you so much for being with us. I mean, I really am grateful.
My pleasure.
I always enjoy talking to old classmates, particularly, which is a lot of fun. So, I went back and looked at your history. You were a history major.
I was.
How on earth did you get from being a history major to filmmaking and writing books and doing all the political stuff that you do?
Well, the weird thing is that I finally, late in my life, come full circle back to doing something involving history. So
Yeah.
it took me a minute with a lot of detours. But yeah, I wrote my senior thesis for David B. Davis. I loved his. Remember, he taught intellectual history, and I don't know if anybody here took that course or whether you did, but
I did not, and I don't think we have any other alums from New Haven on the call with us.
Anyway, I had this incredible professor named David B. Davis who won a Pulitzer for one of his books on slavery, but he taught a course in intellectual history at Yale that got a standing ovation every time. And anyway, so I wrote my senior thesis on the Democratic Convention of 1940, the one where FDR engineered the removal of Henry Wallace as his vice president, and got rid of him in favor of this guy named Harry Truman. So, and anyway, I mean, and we can talk about whether Biden wants to get rid of Kamala Harris.
You anticipate my question.
We'll get there. The answer is no, he does not. She's not going anywhere. We can talk more about that. But anyway, so I long-winded answer to your question, but I stumbled into. Well, I always wanted to be a writer, a journalist. My dad was an editor at Life magazine. I grew up around the dinner table hearing stories about him editing Hemingway and the Weekly Life. I wound up working for Foreign Policy magazine right out of college for a guy named Richard Holbrooke, who went on to all kinds of bigger and better things. And then I stumbled into television, produced for 60 Minutes for almost 5 years. Went to ABC News for 19 years, left ABC to start my own documentary company, which led to a documentary on White House Chiefs of Staff, which led to a book called The Gatekeepers on the White House Chiefs of Staff.
Which we actually read 2 years ago in the same book club, so.
Okay. And so I've been writing books ever since, and doing the occasional documentary.
Well, so you have the 3 books, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what would you?
The Gatekeepers on the White House Chiefs of Staff, the Spy Masters on the CIA directors, from Richard Helms to more or less to the present, and then my current book on Mr. Biden.
And I have read them all, and I'm wondering 2 things: what's your day job, and what's the next book?
So the day job is trying to figure out what the next book is. And there are several candidates that I'm kicking around, but as they say out at Langley, if I told you, I'd have to.
You'd have to shoot us. That's right, and we are recording, so we could publish that, but we could turn the recording off for 5 seconds. You could tell us.
If I knew, I might share it with you. The honest answer is I don't know yet.
Okay. How
we
about
have
Minnesota?
Any secrets?
And for God's sake, I just finished this one, and it almost killed me. And so I'm going to enjoy the book tour a little bit longer.
Yeah. Did it almost kill you?
Yeah, I feel badly for just cutting off someone else who was starting to ask a question.
Oh, Lisa?
Oh, I just said if we have secrets, we can type them in the chat, then it won't be on the recording.
Okay. So, yeah, this book was really an unbelievable challenge. My first 2 books on the White House chiefs and the CIA directors covered cumulatively maybe 100 years of history. This book covers 2. And yet this one was more difficult than either of the others. And part of that is that writing a book about a White House in progress is like designing an airplane in mid-flight. I mean, you're just you're getting hit by events in real time coming out of nowhere. A COVID virus hits you, and then the invasion of Ukraine, and you don't know where you're going to land the plane. You're just hoping you can land it somewhere in time to get it published before Woodward comes sneaking up behind you, and so it was. And compounding that challenge is the fact that this White House is the most battened down, disciplined, no nonsense, on script White Houses in recent history. They do not talk much out of school, and yet I was able ultimately to get access to almost all of Biden's inner circle. So that was tough.
I'm surprised to
Were you
hear. Go ahead, Beth.
Were you able to ever to talk with Kamala Harris?
I was not, and it was disappointing. She offered me the same deal that Joe Biden agreed to, which was the president agreed to answer my written questions with written answers of his own, and which we can talk about, because that was bizarre to me. I've never heard of any president ever doing that for a book. Maybe it's happened before, but Kamala Harris agreed to the same ground rules. I gave her something like a dozen questions, and she simply ducked the ones she didn't feel like answering. And she answered the ones that were easy and with boilerplate. I mean, I just have to say it was as though she had just cut and pasted answers from speeches, whereas Biden clearly spent more time and gave more thought and much more interesting answers. So I have to say it was a disappointing experience with the vice president.
I thought
Right,
you
so
did have
you-
some. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
Just to follow up, it seemed like your disappointment was clear, and you're in the book, and you thought she hadn't found herself yet. Do you feel like since you finished the book that she's come along? And I have to be honest, I'm a Kamala supporter.
Yeah, I think she's doing better. I think she's to some extent found her voice a little bit more. I thought that, she's certainly in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision. She's become more outspoken and effective on defending women's reproductive rights, I think. I also think that her most recent visit to the Munich Security Conference, which was her second visit there, she was very effective when she made the case for war crimes against Putin. So I think she's doing better. Do I think she's doing great? No. I think the bar was pretty low because she had a really rocky first 2 years.
What does a good vice president, what does that like really mean to you?
Well, you've actually really put your finger on something, because when I had an ongoing conversation with Joe Biden's White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, for 2 years. And, it's really sort of the spine of the book. Obviously, my access to Klain made a big difference. And Klain was chief of staff to Joe Biden when he was vice president. And when we would have these conversations about Kamala Harris all the time. And he would say to me, you know what, Chris, it's just a shitty job being vice president. It's just a no-win proposition. There was talk about Biden replacing, or rather Barack Obama replacing Joe Biden at various points during his stint as vice president. But I think that Biden frankly had a much more successful vice presidency than Kamala Harris has so far. And I think some of it is self-inflicted. I don't underestimate, I hope I don't underestimate the difficulty of being the first Black Asian woman, which is not easy, obviously, in that role. But I think some of it's also been really self-inflicted. And just to give you an example of, I think there are people who think that the Biden White House must be trying to muzzle her or keep her on a short leash. I can tell you that is not the case. In fact, Klain would constantly go to her and say, listen, you got to get out there. You can't score runs from the dugout. You really should be more visible, and we would welcome that. So for whatever reason, she did not for a long time, and possibly because she felt burned by her trip to Guatemala early on, when she took a lot of criticism for fumbling that question from Lester Holt about the border, and she was taking a lot of grief. So
is she being measured as if she were a presidential candidate and potentially the next Democratic potential candidate? And let me turn the question around and say, suppose that she were not to be considered as a presidential candidate at any point down the road. Would the assessment of her be different?
Well, yeah, but that's not the real world. I mean, the vice president is by definition in a position to assume the presidency and should be expected to assume the presidency at any moment, obviously, and in the event of calamity. But also, the vice president is by definition sort of the front runner of his or her party when the president steps down. So I think she's inevitably measured as somebody who as a future presidential candidate, as she should be.
So speak to the question you left hanging. To what extent is her gender and her race a factor in all of this?
I don't know that I could answer that any better than the rest of you could. It's very real. I'm sure that it's a much more difficult challenge for her, but I don't think that's something I could speak to any better than anyone else. I think it is what it is.
I think you did hint at it in the book when you talked about her being accused of going on a shopping spree at some point.
Right.
I mean, that says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, that's a great example of that stereotype kicking in political coverage of her. But look, I think I also mentioned that FDR had thrown Henry Wallace under the bus and
Right.
replaced him with Harry Truman. The last time that happened was Gerald Ford, who got rid of Nelson Rockefeller, whom he really couldn't stand. But that's not going to happen. It's obviously extremely rare, and it wouldn't be politically viable for Biden to replace her. Nor do I think he wants to. I don't mean to suggest that he's tempted to in any way. I think they have a very interesting, complicated relationship, as I write in the book.
I got the impression that you did have one-on-one personal time with the president. Is that not accurate?
That's not accurate, actually. Not in the room. I was never in the room with Biden for an interview, and I was, tried to be careful to say in the book, maybe not clearly enough, but I certainly did say in the book that it was what the ground rules were. And as you can imagine, getting written answers to written questions is a totally different animal from being in the room.
When you get written answers, do you assume that those are genuinely from the person that you've asked the questions of, or do you assume it's going through like layers of PR teams and communications people?
No, it's a very good question. I don't think you can assume anything, but I really genuinely believe that these were that this was essentially an interview conducted by Ron Klain, the White House Chief of Staff, where he sat there and said, "Okay, Mr. President, I promised Whipple we would do this. Here are his questions." Biden answered the questions, and Klain went and cleaned them up. So I don't think it was a committee of censors, but I do think that I'm sure that Ron was very careful to make sure that the answers were, he vetted them. Let's put it that way.
Well, it's totally akin to written interrogatories in litigation, which I've dealt with for decades. It's usually the lawyers who actually do the first draft of the answer. And I wonder whether you have it backwards, that Klain actually wrote the answers subject to Biden's approval and editing.
That's possible. I just think it went down the way I described it, but I can't.
Okay. Yeah, no, for sure.
So, but again, it's that may be common in the law, in legal firms, but in journalism, it's pretty rare. And I can't really think of, it's funny. I'm going to see Peter Baker, my friend Peter Baker, on Thursday,
Right.
and I'm going to ask him if he can think of any other case where a president did written answers to written questions for a book. Because, had I been in the room, it would have been a very different interview. Because
of
when
course.
when you're in the room, and I'll tell you what I think my first question would have been had I been in the room. I would have looked around first to see who else was in the room. And then I think I would have said, "Mr. President, can you trust your Secret Service detail? Do you believe that you can speak freely around them?" And I don't know what he would have said, because I think I know what the true answer is. And I wrote about it.
Yeah, that was near the end of the book, as I recall.
And I might have just, my gut is that I might have jolted him into a really interesting response. Had that been the first question right out of the blocks. I'll never know. I'll never know what his honest answer would be. But what I do know, having been around long enough, having been around the White House long enough, is that you're never going to get an honest answer to that question in writing.
Right. Lisa?
I found that to be really the most horrifying part of the book, that Biden can't trust his Secret Service. And I guess if you were going to ask him that question, like, you must have gotten a whiff of that from somewhere else to know that that could be true. And how horrible is that? And is that still continuing now? I mean,
yeah, I agree with you. I completely agree. And I'm surprised it didn't get it. It got a fair amount of pickup attention when the book came out. People wrote about it. And Politico Playbook wrote about it, and other places. And the White House made what Ben Bradley used to call one of my favorite phrases, a non-denial denial. They basically, they very gently pushed back on it. In fact, Karine Jean-Pierre said, the president has faith in his Secret Service detail. No,
yeah, just like Mike Pence did, you mean?
Yeah, right, exactly.
well, and that also, like, was it really? I thought Pence didn't want to leave the basement where he was in that loading dock area during the insurrection because he wanted to, like, stay there to help. But
Go
was
down
it
with
your
the ship.
book that was saying that he didn't want to leave because he was afraid of where they would take him?
Yep.
And like where they were going to hang him part,
God
or
only
just
knows.
far away?
God
What?
only knows, but Pence was afraid that his detail might have been part of the larger January 6th plot. So he didn't want to get in that car.
That's also horrifying. And what do we do to clean house? Like, let's get some new Secret Service people.
I agree. I think there should be a real shakeup in the Secret Service. But so anyway, you never know when you write a book like this, you have some sense of what you think the newsworthy ingredients are, and this was certainly one of them, and it got some pickup, but not quite as much as I thought it might have, because I find it unacceptable just as an American to think that the Secret Service, these guys and women are supposed to check their politics at the door. And to have somebody,
Lots of people are supposed to check their politics at the door who don't pull that. I mean, look at our entire.
Yeah, but this is different because
But
they're
Secret Service
supposed to
is different.
protect them.
Yeah.
They're supposed to keep them safe. So, that's a completely different job.
yeah, and look, I think that this goes back to all you need to know for context is not only what Mike Pence did on the morning of January 6th, but the fact that Trump spent 4 years doing everything in his power to politicize the Secret Service. He made his most loyal, sycophantic agent, deputy White House chief for operations, a boldly political move that had never been done before, Tony Ornato.
Right.
And so, this was the consequence of Biden. Biden really liked the head of his detail when he was during the transition. That guy was transferred out for some reason. And then when he became president, the size of his security detail tripled or quadrupled or whatever it did. And suddenly he realized that there were some of these guys were openly MAGA sympathizers. So, it bugged him.
Gee, the
But the
Secret
answer to your
Service would-
question is, did I get some hint of this? Not only did I get a hint of this, I got this from a source who is one of the president's closest friends in the world. And then I had it confirmed by somebody else who knows him very, very well. So anyway,
So the Secret Service would be a good topic for your next book.
well, yeah, I mean, Carol Leonig did a book on the Secret Service a few
Oh,
years ago.
did she? Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I reviewed it for the New York Times book review. And it was good, but sure, there's certainly another book that could be done.
Right. Well, maybe you and Carol ought to do it together.
Team up, yeah.
Yeah. And she would be a lot of fun to work with, I would imagine.
She scares me.
Really.
I think, no, I like her. But boy, she's tough. And
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how much she'd want to collaborate on a book. But
I
anyway.
got you. I see her interviewed all the time. So,
Yeah.
and I really pay attention when
On
she
the other
comes
hand,
on.
Maggie Haberman scares me too. She seems
Well-
so tough, and yet she's a sweetheart. I really like her.
And
she's
Peter Baker's
not
wife scares
nearly
you
as-
as well.
When she's not the bulldog that she appears to be when she's doing interviews. She's
Right. And Peter Baker's wife scares you as well.
no, I love Susan. She's great.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So who were your favorite people and who were your least favorite people as you put this all together? I mean, your list of cast of characters was unbelievably long.
Ron, do you mean favorite people like to hang out with or to interview?
Sure.
Two different answers.
Of course it is.
Yes. So, look, I think it's a rich cast of characters in the Biden White House, all the more so because they're so little known in a way. I mean, we don't know them nearly as well as we know all the villains in the Trump White House, the Steve Bannons and the Mark Meadowses and the Michael Flynn's. We knew an awful lot about them, right? But we don't know that much about Biden's inner circle. And I find them really interesting. I think that Jake Sullivan fascinates me.
I was just going to ask you about him. Go ahead.
Jake Sullivan fascinates me. I spoke to, first of all, he considered by everyone to be a once in a generation intellect. Hillary Clinton plucked him, just grabbed him and made him her right-hand person.
Right.
And then of course he joined the Biden White House. But I talked to his one of his best friends as an undergraduate at Yale, and she said he was, he had this analytical firepower. He could analyze anything in a heartbeat. But sort of more impressive than that to her was this almost corny sort of love of country and sense of duty. And the way she put it, I love the phrase. She said he had a sense of responsibility before he had any responsibility. And he he takes things he's very to heart. I mean, he really cares about, by all accounts, he's very grounded and, caring to his friends and all that. I don't mean to paint this guy as a saint, but
Right. But you did or did not talk to him directly.
well, here's the odd thing is that Sullivan is the one guy who never got around to talk to me among the real inner circle. So I wound
Okay.
up talking to a lot of people who knew him very well
Got it.
to paint
know,
this picture of him.
you know that he's a Minnesotan.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
he went
yes.
to Southwest High School in Minneapolis. Then, of course, you already alluded to the fact that he's a Yale grad. After he finished law school, which I think was also Yale Law School, he was a clerk to one of the
Well,
Supreme
he was a
Court
Rhodes Scholar
justices.
first, and then
Okay, forgot that.
and then he came back and he went to Yale Law School.
Right.
So he was
When
Yale,
he was
Rhodes Scholar, and then Yale Law School.
right after he was done clerking, he came back to Minneapolis, worked for a local large law firm called Faegre and Benson. That's what it was called then. And while
Right.
he was at Faegre and Benson, the local Yale club here had an evening with him,
Uh-huh.
which was really fun. So I got to meet him then. He came back through town at least once, I think stumping for Hillary Clinton. He came back another time for a University of Minnesota political confab, which he was the co-guest with Walter Mondale. And I had a bit of an ongoing correspondence with him while he was still at Yale Law School. Then he went off to Dartmouth, and then he went on with Hillary Clinton. And I imagine that if I even got so lucky as to have a contact information at the moment, he wouldn't remember who I was. But I did have the chance to.
Oh, he probably would. He probably would. Anyway.
Well, I'd love that. I'd love to get him on my Saturday morning conversation, but something tells me that wouldn't happen. But
You never know until you try, Ron.
That's right.
Well,
Believe in
for
yourself.
sure. For sure.
But anyway,
you're right. You're right. He always had that low key, homespun Minnesotan demeanor, which I suspect serves him well when he's in the halls of power over in Iran or wherever he is. They don't know what to make of him.
Yeah. So anyway, I find him to be fascinating, and of course, there are a lot of interesting people in that White House. Ron Klain. I mean, Klain. It's almost kind of a joke. I mean, Klain is so good at everything. I was at a gathering with a whole bunch of. I was speaking to a group of really accomplished people, and I said, this may be the greatest collection of talent since Ron Klain dined alone, because he really could do anything. I went to see Jeff Zients, his replacement, a couple of weeks after Zients got the job, and I was sitting in his office, and we were talking about Klain, and Zients said, and he pointed to the ceiling where the White House counsel's office was. He said, if we had an opening there, Ron could go upstairs and do it. If we needed a communications director, Ron could do that. If we need a national security advisor, Ron could do that. No problem. He could do almost anything. So Klain is a really impressive, but also incredibly down-to-earth, earnest, unprepossessing guy.
Yeah. Why did he leave, and where is he now?
He left because the job of White House Chief of Staff, as you know from reading The Gatekeepers, is the most relentless, unbelievably grueling, thankless, 24/7 jobs on the planet. The average tenure is 18 months. Klain was there for 2 years, and he almost quit 9 months in. He was so exhausted. So he was. I mean, nobody can do that job effectively, I don't think, for
maybe it needs
more
to
than
be
2 years.
rethought of as a job, like if it's that tough of a job, maybe it needs to be reimagined. I also have a very big problem with the fact that there's never been a woman in that job.
Well, I have a big problem with that too, and I've always said that that's insane. It's crazy that there hasn't been. The Obama almost appointed a woman at one point, Nancy Ann DeParle. I wrote about that in The Gatekeepers, but it's long overdue. And in fact, Ron told me that when he left, he thought there was a good possibility that he'd be succeeded by a woman, but no such luck.
Well, you may remember,
there
Chris,
be-
that I emailed you as Klain was stepping down, asking whether Jen Psaki was going to take over, and you responded faster than any email I've written to you. No, it's Jeff Zients, and that was before the announcement, maybe a week before the announcement. Did you know something, or was it just that apparent?
That was just nobody had confirmed that to me, and Klain had not confirmed it to me at that point. I didn't know for sure, but I was pretty sure.
Okay, but why not Jen Psaki? She's pretty good.
Well, she had already left to do a show at MSNBC.
Had
At
she
that
left
point,
already?
or she was,
Yeah, but
or she was
she could've
almost
come
on her
back.
way. So that wasn't going to happen. But there were certainly other women in the White House who might have stepped in. But I think that the White House chief's job is, it's one of these things that these chiefs do not, the great ones are almost impossible to find because it requires an incredible skill set. You have to be, first of all, you have to have White House experience, you have to have knowledge of Capitol Hill, you have to have deep political savvy, you have to have a world-class temperament, and you have to have a real bond, a great working relationship with the boss. The great ones, the James A. Bakers, the Leon Panettas, the Ron Klains, have all of that. Zients has almost all of that. He doesn't have a lot of deep political savvy, and his relationship with Biden is not 3.5 decades like Klain's. What that kind of relationship does is it enables the chief to tell the president what he doesn't want to hear.
Yeah. Why not you?
And
Why
the
not
answer,
you, Chris?
no, if nominated, I will not accept. If elected, I will not
I will
serve.
not serve. Right.
But somebody was just, forgive me, somebody was just saying maybe it needs to be rethought. Or I don't think you can split that job into two. And it's an argument that I make in the gatekeepers is that you cannot, every president learns sometimes the hard way that you cannot govern effectively without empowering a White House chief of staff as first among equals to execute your agenda and tell you what you don't want to hear. And only one person can do that, I think.
Yeah, I remember when I was reading that book of yours, thinking this job is basically, for someone with superpowers, because like you just listed all the skills they have to have. It does seem impossible. And it's such an important job, like it almost makes or breaks a presidency, that, as an American citizen, it kind of scares me that so few people can do that job well.
Yeah, I know.
You had a in chapter 3, you talked about all of the former chiefs of staff having a video conference.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear the video conference, you just had that from bits and pieces of talking to people?
Yeah, because I know all these guys pretty well by now. And even though that's supposed to be an off the record private thing, they couldn't help themselves. They just, I managed to get them to give me chapter and verse on that. And by the way, there was I will tell you all off the record that there was a similar meeting that took place for Jeff Zients when he got the job, which has not been reported. But Zients had a meeting in the Roosevelt Room with 10 former White House chiefs, and 6 of them were virtual, coming in by Zoom. My favorite contribution came from Rahm Emanuel. Rahm was supposed to be on the call, but he was not. He's, as you know, he ambassador to Japan. Bill Daley started off by saying, "Hey, Jeff, I just spoke to Rahm and he has a message. He wants all of us to know that we can all go fuck ourselves." So anyway, that was Rahm's contribution. And then they went from there.
That sounds like a typical Chicago type comment.
And they all gave their advice to Zients.
Yeah, well, Zients was already pretty close in, given his work on the COVID pandemic stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, he had a pretty good handle.
And the good news about Zients is that he has the same temperament that Klain has, and he's really well liked. No ego. He is a genius at making government work. He was the guy in the Obama White House when the Affordable Care website blew up, went in smithereens.
Right.
Who are you going to call? Jeff Zients. Zients came and fixed it. There's a reason why, and he's the one who got 220 million Americans vaccinated in 100 days. That's why they chose Zients to run the coronavirus.
It seems to me that the job of chief right now, this year, in the third year of Biden's term, is vastly different from Biden's first 2 years because the House is controlled by Republicans and they will get no legislation passed. So the job of chief is twofold. One, to execute on the bills that were passed in the first 2 years, and two, to figure out where executive orders can be issued to further the Biden policies. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, well, that would be just for openers.
Okay.
So you've got all of that. You've got, by the way, you've got a re-election with an 82-year-old running for re-election pretty soon.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And he's got to be able to. Zients is the only guy who can say to the campaign manager, whoever that turns out to be, no, the president is not flying to Wisconsin tomorrow because he's trying to govern. You have to deal with all of that. He's got to govern, to some extent by executive order. We saw some of that today with Biden rolling out executive orders on childcare. And so, the chief of staff's duties vary depending on where he or she comes in the cycle. But the toughest part right now will be the tension between governing and campaigning, I think.
Well, before we get there, there's also the little nuance of the debt ceiling and the game of chicken that Republicans are playing. I don't know how much the chief will be involved in that in counseling Biden.
Deeply, yeah, very much so. I think to some extent, maybe not quite as much as Ron Klain would have been because I think Zients doesn't feel he has the same political savvy and antenna that Ron had. And so Steve Ricchetti and Anita Dunn and Mike Donilon and Jen O'Malley Dillon will be more involved probably in that.
I've seen a couple of proposed solutions to the debt ceiling. One is printing the $3 trillion coin, and the other is just ignoring the law on debt ceiling and continuing to issue checks from the Treasury. Any thoughts on whether either of those is viable?
Now you're way above my pay grade. I don't do economics.
Ron also really loves like feral banking strategies. So
right. Yeah, I had a choice first semester freshman year of taking Econ 101 with a graduate student or Jim Tobin, and I was too intimidated to take Tobin, so I had a graduate student. Oh well.
So did you even know that Hillary and Bill were at Yale Law School while we were there?
No. Did
no,
you?
Nobody did. Nobody knew who they were. But
no, I know.
But I knew Robert Reich, who was their classmate.
Right,
Clarence Thomas was also a classmate in that class. But Reich was teaching, and he's about, as you know, he's about 4 feet tall. So everybody knew Reich.
Yeah, right.
And he was brilliant. And he was absolutely brilliant. And he did it. He was my TA in a course on constitutional law. And we all thought he was going to be a Supreme Court justice, but
oh my,
that's how much we knew.
I had
he's very good at the TikTok now, I've heard.
Reich?
Yes.
Yeah, I just see him all the time on Twitter.
I'm not into TikTok, so I wouldn't know as.
I've just accepted that all of the corporations are spying on us. So like, well, okay, whatever.
Right.
Really, I had Tony...
when it comes to the debt ceiling and just anything to do with the economics and the banking system, Zients he comes from the private sector and he really knows that world.
Okay.
Zients could be a good guy to be there. I mean, I think he was the perfect guy to be there when the Silicon Valley Bank went down, because he understands that world.
Okay. Well, if you still have access to him, send a message from me that he should get in touch with Stephanie Kelton, who is the author of the Modern Monetary Theory, which basically supports either of the two solutions to the debt ceiling that I mentioned. Most notably, printing the $3 trillion coin. There's nothing to stop us from printing a $3 trillion coin. Wouldn't hurt
Oh,
us.
you're
in the
serious?
slightest. It's what?
You're serious?
I am dead serious, and
Just
so
send me
is
an
she.
email. I'm gonna see Zients next week. I'm having lunch with him next week.
Okay, I will send you a thumbnail synopsis of what I
Okay.
understand Stephanie Kelton's theory to be, and why it works, and where its limitations are. Its limitations are basically inflation, and that's it.
Well, the other
But-
limitation, Ron.
We have that already, Ron.
Well, no, not so much anymore. It's going away.
Eh.
The other
It's
limitation
still at
might,
5%. So
I say eggs are still very expensive, Ron.
I finally
might
got
be
a
a
rise out of this
limitation.
group. But John, what were you going to say, John?
yeah, the other limitation is, how would that sell politically with the Republicans mocking Biden for the next year and a half for printing his way out of serious dealing with the budget? You know, they'll make up something like that, and
Of course
that
they
will be the main liability of him going.
I mean, that's their job. Like they're gonna throw down about something dumb. So like,
They make up enough stuff already. I don't think it matters at this point.
That could be.
Selling fiction to people anyways.
yeah.
true,
I
but
do-
some
Whatever.
stuff sticks and other stuff doesn't. So I think it does matter.
True, but also how many normies care about banking policy and the debt ceiling?
But I don't get, what do you do with a $3 trillion coin?
You put it in your pocket.
You put it into the Federal Reserve System. Banks have the ability to draw on that money and lend it to any business that needs to have it lent, or the Treasury has the ability to pay its bills regardless of the debt ceiling.
It removes the debt by $3 trillion when you do
Right.
that, even though it's all on paper.
That's
Well,
right.
or we could do what we have always done, as far as I know, in modern history, which is pass the goddamn thing,
Yeah.
Well,
pass the debt ceiling, and then fight about the budget.
Didn't
You
they
don't take the debt ceiling, the full faith and credit, as they say, of the United States, and hold it hostage before raising the debt ceiling on debts we've already incurred, right? It's never
Right.
happened. Nobody's ever attached strings to that, and good luck to Kevin McCarthy if he wants to do so now.
I mean, all those big Republican donors are not gonna let the Republicans do that, right? I
I
mean,
don't think
it's
so.
just not gonna happen.
What was it not the debt ceiling stuff that caused the government shutdown that one time?
Yeah.
there
I'm
was-
just remembering.
yes.
There was certainly arguing there. Yeah, there was certainly arguing about it. Yeah.
Okay, but that was okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
It's
that
been a
did
while.
happen very close to it. It didn't last very long. And
pro-
Kevin
But the debt
McCarthy,
ceiling
as
was
you-
raised. I mean, the
was.
government did shut down, but the debt ceiling was raised.
It
I mean, the
tried,
debt
it-
ceiling is more about our obligations to foreign countries and other things. Like it doesn't just
Well-
affect a government shutdown.
Well, most US debt is held by US entities, either mostly private US entities. So
Well,
it's
none of those want a default
Right.
either.
sure.
Most US debt is held by other governmental agencies like Social Security, the Social Security Administration. The Social Security Administration took all its cash, put it into the general treasury, and got in return IOUs, which are treasury bonds. That's what's in the Social Security Trust.
If we can leave the debt issue, I have a question for Chris. The main reason, I know you guys love talking debt
Since
economics.
Chris obviously knows nothing about this subject. So,
You mentioned in the book, the main reason Biden decided to run was Jews will not replace us, that stuff happening in Charlottesville. And who would they, why, I always come back in my mind, this is a non sequitur, but why the hell would they want to replace youth thugs? That's not even on their mind if I were Jewish. But But my main question is, the reason Biden ran was to bring normalcy back to this country. And I think he's done a remarkable job in certain ways, but we still have, I think, a legacy of Donald Trump is, and this may not be the way to characterize it, the social legalization of hate. And that's why people shoot people coming up to their doorstep. Trump enabled the worst part of our characters to thrive. And I don't know how you attack that, but if that's not your next book, then how do you think Biden is doing on that so far?
So I think, I think when historians look back at Biden, I of course tried to do it in real time, but I think there'd be sort of at least 3 defining tests of this presidency. And the first will be, how did he do with a once in a century pandemic? How did he tackle that? Second will be, what did he do when February 24, 2022, when Putin invaded Ukraine. But I think the third test, and maybe even as important as, or more important than the others, will be how did he stand up to the lingering power of Trumpism and the threat it poses to democracy. And I think that he'll really be judged on how well he met that moment. And when he was elected, I think the thing that over the course of the first 2 years of his presidency, the thing that I wrote this in the book, the thing that shocked him more than anything else during his presidency was the continuing power of Trumpism, of MAGA. He thought it would be over by now. He really thought it'd be in the rearview mirror. He had this old-fashioned notion that he had a mandate and had won by 7 million votes, and that by now this would start to fade. And I think what he's learned over the last 2 years is that it hasn't gone anywhere, and that he has to stand up to it. You know, for a long time, he would not even mention Trump by name. He would say the former guy. He was trying to unite the country. And then increasingly, he has now stepped up. I think since that fabulous speech he gave on the anniversary of January 6th in the Capitol, when he really called out Trumpism and the threat to democracy that it poses. So I think he's increasingly done that. And I think that he really now believes that democracy is on the ballot in 2024, and that Trump is likely to be the Republican nominee. And I think they're planning for that. And I think he takes it very seriously.
Thank you. Interesting.
So we're coming up on an hour, and I've got a laundry list of issues, and I forget what it's called. But if I give you a word and you give me 30 seconds back, and is that shotgun or
lightning round? The lightning round.
Lightning round. That's the thing.
Okay.
So, how would you feel about doing a lightning round on issues?
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, Dominion, the settlement.
Dominion. Boy, disappointing. I'm afraid that it's a victory for the lawyers, but not for democracy. That Fox will go on. They'll consider this the cost of doing business and go on doing what they're doing.
Neil Ackerman said today that quite the contrary is true, because the settlement will be paid by insurance companies, and insurance companies have more power to control behavior than anybody in the world.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with Nick on this.
Okay. Environmental issues, climate change.
Well, that would be how many defining tests did I mention? That would be defining test number 4 of this presidency. And I think that very little's been written about this, but the guy who's in charge of implementing all of the global warming measures that Biden was able to pass is John Podesta. He's
Oh.
he's working in the White House, and that's his job number one, is figuring out how to implement that stuff. So it's still a huge issue and a big part of Biden's legacy.
I thought it was John Kerry's legacy, John Kerry's bailiwick.
Well, Kerry too, but Podesta's sort of in charge of where the rubber meets the road.
Okay. How do we get out of Ukraine?
As Ronald Reagan once said about the Soviet Union, we win and they lose.
So does that involve much more United States military, and particularly air support?
Well, whatever it takes short of direct American involvement. I think, everybody keeps saying that conquering Ukraine is an existential thing for Putin. I think stopping him is existential for the West. I think Biden understands Putin in a way that none of his predecessors did. So I think he's really stepped up, and I hope he continues to.
I got to interject a lightning question myself. What do you think about people in America being more worried about paying 50 cents more for gasoline than saving the democracy and the people of Ukraine?
Well, disappointing, but it's human nature to some
The
extent.
gasoline is right now in front of me, John. Ukraine's real far away.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and gasoline
I'm not
prices,
saying I agree with it, but like,
gas prices are way down, actually. So aren't they? I mean, I'm in the bubble of New York City, but that's what I keep hearing.
They're creeping back up a little bit.
Are they?
Well, it's coming for the summer, they'll be high in the summer with the demand for driving.
Well, it's
and the
really
production tax.
because the signs are so big and you see them constantly when you drive around. You don't see the price of anything else so easily. I think that's
And
what
you know
people
what,
fixate on it.
But seriously, I don't sense, and you all would have a much better sense of this than I do, but being out in the real world as opposed to New York City. But I get the sense that there's pretty solid support among most Americans for Ukraine. That despite the Ron DeSantis's and Marjorie Taylor Greenes and a few.
I don't think most people think about it much, frankly.
yeah,
Most of
I
them.
think another thing that's disturbing is the way the press covers lots of issues, but the way they cover Biden, I mean, they've been brutalized. Trump manipulated them to a T. He was a genius at that. But Biden is too straightforward and honest and full of integrity to be that way. But the press doesn't link gas prices, doesn't remind the American public that gas prices are tied to not decisions by Biden so much as decisions of our battles in Ukraine or the Ukrainian fight with Russia. And I don't see that the press has been very good at really reminding us of what the real causes are.
Yeah. Well,
China.
I wouldn't argue with
Finish your
that.
answer. Finish your answer, Chris.
No, I was going to say, there's a tradition, obviously, of the press trying to be tough on current presidents, and obviously I'm conscious of that as I was writing the book, but I did my best tried to be fair.
All right, China. How does President Biden deal with China politically, economically, and environmentally?
Well, again, another huge challenge, and it's as he early on said, and nobody really took him very seriously. The 21st century is a battle between democracy and autocracy. I think he was prescient about that, and it was certainly true in Ukraine, but probably even more true of the U.S. and China. And again, it's all interrelated, and because what we do in defense of Ukraine will likely determine what happens between the Chinese and Taiwan. So it's all interrelated, and I do think that for all the despite their rocky start with the Afghan evacuation, I think this is a pretty pretty remarkable foreign policy and national security team, from Blinken to Sullivan to Bill Burns and the rest. So but this is a huge challenge.
I didn't catch that you spent any time on gun violence in the book.
Actually, I spent some space on it. I wrote about the bromance that Joe Biden was having with our mayor Eric Adams, and
Yes, you did.
and how important, how difficult the whole crime issue is, and how important it would be between now and his reelection. So I touched on it.
Okay. Last question, although I have many more. Should Dianne Feinstein resign?
I think it's time.
Okay. Anybody have other questions that they'd like to get in before we finish? Austin?
I do really quickly. There was a point in the book, and I don't remember which chapter, but you talked about when former President Obama returned to the White House when they were signing into law, fixing portions of the ACA, and
Right,
how Obama
expanding the ACA,
yeah, and how Obama really hadn't commented much either really saying anything about Biden's time in office up to that point. And
right.
Maybe this question doesn't matter as much going into a second term, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I mean, do you think that there's some strength in that in terms of the Biden administration standing on its own and showing that it's not just riding former President Obama's coattails, that they are an administration that can operate and be effective? Or do you think that President Obama should be doing more in terms of speaking out in support?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure that how much Obama can do to help Biden, although I'm sure he will be out there during the 2024 campaign as a surrogate, helping wherever he can. And I didn't mean to suggest that there was, such tension between them that Obama can't be helpful. I think he will be. I just found it kind of fascinating talking to people who know them both well, who shall remain nameless. But I just found it kind of fascinating hearing these stories about how Obama really, really was not at all thrilled when Biden and his team were talking about being like FDR and being transformational, and how Obama's stimulus back in 2009 was small potatoes and not enough, at the time. And, this really got under Obama's skin. And I just found that kind of fascinating, because mostly what you read about those two guys is what a bromance they had. And, so I just find it, and I find it so plausible too, that presidents are intensely competitive. So,
the thing that made me question the bromance thing was when we heard that Biden had never been into the residence the whole time Obama was president. It's like, what?
Yeah. Wasn't that interesting? I mean, I found that I when I stumbled across that, I just found that really telling. And it was reminiscent of the way George H.W. Bush and Barbara were never invited upstairs by the Reagans. And you never think of you never think of Barack and Michelle as being like haughty or snooty like the Reagans, right? And yet, there were boundaries.
Yeah. Other last questions?
I've got one I've got to ask it. Well, I got two, but one is, what was in that letter that Trump left in Biden's desk? That's just killing me. Did you ever find out?
No, but I really want to know, and I kind of think that, I don't honestly know when that, at some point, I think we're going to be able to read that letter, but Biden doesn't want to share it. I'm pretty sure that he's turned it over to the National Archives, and at some point it'll be available. But if I were Jack Smith or Merrick Garland, I think I'd want to read that letter. Because it goes to mens rea. It goes to what did he really think? Did he really think he'd lost the election? No, I don't think so.
Well, Chris, this has been delightful. You'll recognize that Minnesota, like Michigan, we have a Democratic trifecta. We don't get nearly the publicity that Michigan gets, which I suppose is a good thing. And the legislature and the governor are working real hard on policy stuff, economic and social out here. So I wish we would get a little more attention paid to
You
all the good
should.
work.
You guys deserve more attention, and I need to make a visit. And by the way, I didn't mention my pal Dennis McDonough.
Oh, yeah, he's a Minnesota guy.
You know, and McDonough, by the way, is a guy who Zients really leans on. You know, Dennis may be running the VA, but those chiefs really have a lot to offer each other. And I think Dennis is a real confidant for Zients, and of course had a lot of experience, you know, in Obama's second term governing by executive order. So,
do you have any final thoughts for us?
Just keep doing what you're doing and have me back at some point.
Oh, we would love that. Oh my
Get
gosh.
out there and campaign in 2024 as though our democracy depended on it.
That's what the people on this call do. We do a lot of it, and with the trifecta, I guess we must do it well. Lisa, you want to turn off the recording? Lisa?
Yes, I'm trying to find the button.
Oh, okay.
Now it's time for all the secrets.
Yeah, right.